Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Public Accounts Committee deserves our thanks for these reports. Although the committee reviewed these reports of the Auditor General, and since then, Mr. Speaker, many interesting scenarios have unfolded, and they are very, very important. And they unfolded, Mr. Speaker, after this report was compiled and tabled in Parliament in August 2021. The findings of the Auditor General in the report, reviewed and noted by the committee, as well as its audit of the government, commercial companies, statutory organisations and other entities, following the scrutiny for 2018, has led to far more serious issues. Of course, Mr. Speaker, we've been hearing, particularly from two entities listed in the report, the Fijian Broadcasting Commission and Walesi Communications, giving their own spin to the so-called objectives and how wonderfully they have performed. Mr. Speaker, I mention these two entities because in the last decade, both have jointly been allocated about $150 million of taxpayers' funds in grants. Walesi has been granted until the end of this financial year $67 million, while FBC has been allocated over $80 million in the last decade. And in this Auditor General's report, Mr. Speaker, reviewed by this committee, FBC shows a profit of over $4.7 million, just because they got $11.3 million in grants from government, under the guise of public service broadcast fees for television and radio. This, of course, Mr. Speaker, has been treated as revenue or income and not a capital grant. And of course, without it, FBC would have recorded a loss of almost $7 million for 2018. This is similar to a profit, as we saw before, declared by the Fiji Sugar Corporation a few years ago because it received a last-minute injection of around $50 million in taxpayers' funds. So these are essentially government grants given to these organizations, which then translates into profits. Worse, Mr. Speaker, FBC has now, for all intents and purposes, has become a state or government broadcaster instead of a national radio and television service provider. And that too, after consuming $80 million of public funds. From a mere $1.5 million before the coup in 2006, 15 years ago in grant, this government has raised the bar to $11.3 million. We only saw a little dip in the current budget, and the amount still stands at an extremely high $9.3 million. One wonders, Mr. Speaker, why the exceptional rise in government grants? What is the nature of the public service that FBC provides, which benefits the entire nation? Or is this like exclusive print advertising by government in the Fiji Sun, another excellent example of exclusive beneficiary of taxpayers' dollars? And no prizes for guessing that Fiji Sun is also a government rag, a propagandist. Then there is Walesi, a 100% taxpayers-owned communications body, Mr. Speaker, which is listed as having a revenue base of $30 million on a United States analytical site called Dun & Bradstreet. Walesi's board chairman, Robert Khan, is listed as the principal despite not owning a single share in the organization. Question is why? Is this a mistake? Is this erroneous as claimed by Walesi a week after the NFP revealed this information through Honorable Lenora Gira Tambua? And I want to ask, has it been corrected if it was wrong? But in terms of this report, Mr. Speaker, if Walesi's income is in the millions of dollars, why the financial statements, as pointed out by my colleague Honorable Aseri Randrondo, were not presented for 4 years? The committee couldn't scrutinize Walesi because it didn't provide anything to the Auditor General until this report was compiled. However, Walesi has been in the news lately, and that has led to a scenario never before witnessed in our history since the enactment of the Audit Act over 50 years ago in 1969. Way past the completion of this report by the Public Accounts Committee is the stunning development of a commission of inquiry into the Office of the Auditor General announced by government on 31st December 2021. We will not die wondering why. The Auditor General's reports, because of his tabling in Parliament with rapidity, made the news. And the news, Mr. Speaker, was not very pleasing for this government. It mirrors government's interference through amendment of standing orders, the change in provisions since independence of an opposition member, always chairing Chair Public Accounts Committee. However, what was announced on New Year's Eve, Mr. Speaker, is far worse than anything else in terms of transparency and accountability. A commission of inquiry into the Office of the Auditor General just for doing his job as an independent constitutional office holder. And any government worth its salt must ensure that the Auditor General's office remains independent. And the credentials of the chairman of the inquiry, Mr. Speaker, is highly questionable. His role, you and I both know, in the biggest financial scandal in our history, at least that's what the Minister for Economy says, the National Bank of Fiji collapse, is never mentioned at all by the government announcement of the inquiry. Why? Mr. Speaker, it suits the Minister for Economy and the acting Prime Minister now, and his devious agenda to lay the blame squarely on the soldiers of the then Prime Minister Sitiveni Rabuka. Yesterday he referred to Mr. Rabuka as piper. The acting Prime Minister, Mr. Speaker, is obviously frightened that the former PM and former leader of the opposition has become a formidable political opponent by attracting a large chunk of support away from Fiji First. And this is forcing the Attorney General and his party to scurry all over the country because they fear being buried in the political grave like the rats.
Honourable Speaker.
Like the rats.
Point of order, Honourable Speaker. Honourable Speaker, we are debating about government commercial companies, statutory authorities and commercial statutory authorities. I don't know what Rabuka has to do with it. I don't know what election has to do with it. I don't know what National Bank of Fiji has to do with it. And I don't understand what acting Prime Minister has to do with it. I request Honourable Prasad to remain on the subject. Please debate the report that is before the Parliament.
Mr. Speaker, I am perfectly on the subject, and I can see that the honourable member is complaining like a little kid who has lost his lollies. And make no mistake, Mr. Speaker, make no mistake. Their fear is genuine and will become a reality after voters give their verdict, because we now see the Honourable Attorney General and the acting Prime Minister and most of his silent 25, aided with equally silent replacements who are scattering away like the bullets that Honourable Koya talked about yesterday, failing to hit the target because they are shooting blanks. A good example of shooting blanks is not giving the full credentials of the chairman of the Commission of Inquiry into the Office of the Auditor General. The chairman, as we all know, is Winston
Point
Thompson.
of order, Honourable Speaker.
We know that, Mr. Speaker.
Point of order. Honourable Speaker, Commission of Inquiry into Office of Auditor General has nothing to do with the report that is before the Parliament. I request Honourable Member to refrain from bringing all those things to this particular debate. It's as simple as that. Now he's behaving like a kid and not understanding what's supposed to be debated and what's not.
Mr. Speaker, the report is from the Auditor General's office, and this Parliament has all the right to talk about the inquiry into the Auditor General's office. And the credentials of the chairman, Winston Thompson, Mr. Speaker, as the chairman of the National Bank of Fiji board from 1992 to 1995, until replaced by the Rabuka government, after the discovery of the financial scandal that the Attorney General raises time and again.
Point of order.
It's a point of order.
Sir, point of order. Sir, point of order.
Point of order.
Sir, we had discussed this matter in the business committee meeting about the commission inquiry. And I did alert honourable member who continuously refuses to come to the business committee meeting when he's a permanent member, sending Gerengere Tambo all the time. I urge him to read, please, the Commissioner Inquiry Act and the boundaries that you need to actually adhere to once the Commissioner Inquiry is put in place by His Excellency the President. And if you continue to do that, Mr. Speaker, so I urge him to go and say that outside, because he'll be in breach of the law, and that's what precisely he's going to do now. The Commissioner of Inquiry is independent to this particular report that's before the House, sir, and he is now trying to use this Parliament to slander the chair of the Commission of Inquiry. That's what he's doing. That's the path he's going on, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Honourable Biman Prasad, just stick to the report. Just stick to the
Mr.
report.
Speaker, this Parliament has all the right. No one in this country is above the law, including the President. And if a chairman of an inquiry commission has a credibility, a record problem, then this is the Parliament, this is the forum that needs to know. This man was the chairman of the NBF board,
Honourable,
Point of order.
who ignored the Auditor General's report
Point
at
of
the
order.
time.
Point of order.
Don't yell.
Because you can't hear, you're so
I'm
far in
going
the
to
back.
the speaker.
Next thing you'll be out the door next year.
Order.
This year.
Order.
You wish, you
Honourable-
wish.
You will be, my friend.
You wish.
You watch it.
Honourable
Don't
member.
threaten.
Honourable member, order. While that process is in the process, it should not be touched by anyone else. It's not a matter of who is not above the law. That is the normal procedure. And you know that. Everybody in this Parliament knows that. So, you have the floor, but stick to what is being on the agenda.
I don't take the threats from the acting Prime Minister, He should stop threatening me.
Meaning you'll get voted out. It's not a threat, it's a fact.
Well, you wish, and you should think about that as well. Mr. Speaker, as we heard from Honourable Seri Rondo, I mean, the details that he provided is actually a very, very sad indictment of the way in which this government has been functioning. And it shows, Mr. Speaker, the kind of transparency and accountability that they want. I mean, no wonder, the Code of Conduct Bill hasn't been enacted, although it was introduced in April 2006, revived in 2018 post-elections, and still gathering dust. No wonder the Accountability and Transparency Commission has not been appointed due to the deliberate delay in enacting the Code of Conduct legislation. Yesterday, Mr. Speaker, the acting Prime Minister, in his capacity as Minister for Economy, kind of subjected us to his own curriculum about economy, about debt, transparency and accountability. And last night he talked about financial reporting standards, saying we don't demand reports of unions and organizations, Women Crisis Center, FRIEND, FPSA to be in Parliament. Reports of these institutions are provided.
Sir, point of order.
Point of order.
Sir, point of order. He is again misleading Parliament. I did not say that Parliament does not demand those reports from those organizations. What I said, sir, was that those organizations don't get audited by the Auditor General's office. They get audited by other accounting firms. Does that mean just because it's not been audited by the OAG that their accounts are not credible? That's what I said. Don't mislead Parliament.
Honourable member.
Mr. Speaker, I think the acting Prime Minister is further confusing himself. Yesterday he talked about some organizations which are not being audited by the Auditor General. Therefore, the reports don't come here.
Sir,
But then,
sir, point of order again. I did not say that. The Hansard will reflect that.
You said that.
I did not.
Forget about
Sir.
it.
Sir, I know the words I uttered.
I follow.
Sir, what I said once again, for him to be able to comprehend, and I'll speak slowly, what I said was that these organizations that I mentioned do not get audited by the Office of the Auditor General. They get audited by audit companies. Does that mean just because they are not audited by the Office of the Auditor General that their accounts are not credible? That's what I said. It was a question. And he's saying now, I am saying that what I said yesterday that they should be presented to Parliament. I never said that. I know that. He's again misleading Parliament.
Honourable
Well,
Member,
Mr. Speaker, if FSC and Fiji Ports Corporation Limited reports can be tabled in this Parliament, why isn't Fiji Airways? And he has constantly denied, bringing the Fiji Airways reports to Parliament, or Air Pacific Trading as Fiji Airways annual reports tabled in the People's Parliament. So, there's still this contradiction. Why are we asked to get the reports from the company's office, in case of Fiji Airways? What law prevents tabling of Fiji Airways reports on the floor of Parliament, Mr. Speaker? The acting Prime Minister also gave his own interpretation of the Asian Development Bank or ADB classification report of 2021. As I have repeatedly said, as Honourable Usemate always says, no amount of hogwash can now camouflage the truth. And the truth is, Fiji's economy and debt levels are like a decaying egg, shiny on the outside, but rotten inside. This is the ultimate truth. That is the ultimate truth, Mr. Speaker. The reclassification, and I want to respond to what he said yesterday, the reclassification of Fiji's status means we are a step away from hitting the rock bottom. The economy ministers claim that reclassification is because we are being ravaged by climate change and therefore need access to concessional loan. It's not the single most important reason provided. Mr. Speaker, Fiji has been reclassified for the following: the substantial and sustained deterioration in Fiji's public debt.
Point of order, Honourable Speaker.
Again, Mr. Speaker, they're complaining like little kids.
Honourable Speaker, I really don't understand how many times from this side we actually have to stand up and tell Honourable Member that he should actually stick to the two reports that are being debated. Whatever he is saying, he has been uttering all this nonsense for a while, which is not part of this report. Let's not waste time of the Parliament, let's not waste time of the members. It's almost 3 p.m. Let's stick to the report, debate on the contents of the report, and let's proceed further. He needs to understand that he needs to stick to this report, sir.
Mr. Speaker, look who is talking. We, in this report, Mr. Speaker, we, as you allowed quite rightly, we do respond to issues that have been raised by members previously. So it is about the report, and I don't know why they are complaining like little kids again. So, Mr. Speaker, the Fiji has been reclassified for the following reason: the substantial and sustained deterioration in Fiji's public debt sustainability. That's what the ADB says. The downgrade in Fiji's long-term sovereign credit risk by Moody's Investors Service and Standard and Poor Global Rating (S&P) to highly speculative, reflecting a longer-term deterioration in Fiji's sovereign risk ratings. And why has ADB done this? They have pointed this out very clearly. Fiji's poverty rate has been rising even before the outbreak of COVID-19. As of February 2020, poverty had increased to 29.9%. We've talked about this. Despite Fiji enjoying what the economy minister says, unprecedented growth. 2, the economy declined by 0.4% in 2019 before COVID, and 19% in 2020 according to ADB. We are told it was 15.2%. RBF projects a 4.1% decline in 2021. Even if we take figures of ADB for 2 years, the economy declined by 19.4%. And if we add RBF's 2021 forecast, we end up with a 23.1% decline in 3 years compared to a modest average growth of 3.1% from 2015 to 2019. So we are already...
Point of order, Honourable Speaker.
Point of order.
Honorable Speaker, I ask for your judgment to ask this member to actually stop this nonsense in this parliament. IDB report is nowhere mentioned in this report. We seriously don't understand what he's talking about. Economy about 2020 he's talking about. The decline in economy he's talking about is not in this report. He needs to stick to this report, say, and I ask for your judgment to ask the member to either stick to the report or sit down.
Honourable member, I've asked you to stick to the report.
Mr. Speaker, as I said earlier, I'm not defying you. I understand what you're saying. But I'm actually quite surprised when we speak from this side, they have an opportunity to respond. This is what the debate about these reports are. And therefore, we have the opportunity. I mean, the acting Prime Minister always speaks last, and he says things that we have an opportunity when we have another opportunity to respond to. So I don't know what is the problem with these guys. What is the problem with these guys that we are responding to what the Honourable Minister said? But let me come back to the report as he wants. And he, in his own presentation, Mr. Speaker, the chairman of the Public Accounts Committee, and we all know what his role is as the chairman of the Public Accounts Committee, because he's a government member, he's an assistant minister, and what he did in his presentation of the report was to gloss and say, oh, you know, these entities made profit. And then comes Honorable Aseri Randrondo, who's a member of the Public Accounts Committee, and lays all the facts bare and how delayed the reports were. And he talked about examples of mismanagement, tender not being issued properly by people who are chairing those boards. And he stands up, you know, and says, you know, we can't talk about this. So, you know, it shows, Mr. Speaker, how irrelevant the chairman of the Public Accounts Committee has become in terms of scrutinizing the Auditor General's report. The Auditor General, Mr. Speaker, in any country, any government worth its salt, any government who has an iota of shame about good governance or bad governance will ensure that the Auditor General's report and the Auditor General's office remains independent. What Honorable Aseri Randrondo pointed out, Mr. Speaker, shows the sycophantic approach in the governance of this country. Many of these people, you know, who are chairing those boards are donors of Fiji Fest, you know, and they are not responding to what they should be doing in terms of producing timely reports. And what we heard in Parliament today from a member of the Public Accounts Committee, Mr. Speaker, you know, they should hang their heads in shame. They've been gloating about good governance. They've been gloating about, you know, transparency and accountability. And yet, this is the report which points out how these entities have been functioning. And that is why, Mr. Speaker, the independence of the Auditor General in any attempt, you know, yesterday we had both Honorable Koya and the acting Prime Minister again attacking the Auditor General's office, the Auditor General's ability to, you know, do his job, you know, thoroughly. Mr. Speaker, you know, the NBF scandal happened because the chairman of the board at that time ignored the advice of the Auditor General, Ramesh Dutt. In 1992 and 1993, the then Auditor General Ramesh Dutt warned the chairman and the board of NBF that the loans that they were giving was not sustainable and that it is going to lead to the collapse of the bank. In fact, you know, They keep blaming Rambuka, but to his credit, when he found out, he actually removed the board. He removed the board. He removed the board. You know, he doesn't know. He doesn't know. He doesn't know. He should read this report. You know, the acting Prime Minister, Mr. Speaker. The acting Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker. I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, the acting Prime Minister, the acting Prime Minister has read this. I know he knows everything about what happened in NBF. And here is a man, you know, the hypocrisy is incredible. Incredible. Because he knows what happened. And it was, Mr. Speaker, the result of the board ignoring the warnings of the Auditor General's, report. And in fact, you know, the NFP leader in 1994, he called for an inquiry into the National Bank of Fiji. So when they talk about the collapse of NBF, Mr. Speaker, they forget. In fact, all of them should go and get a copy of this and read the whole report about NBF. They will know what happened, Mr. Speaker. And that is why, Mr. Speaker, you know, for years and years, Public Accounts Committee, the Auditor General's Office, these are sacrosanct, you know, committees for good governance. And any government which tries to tinker with them, which doesn't take it seriously, and which appoints a chairman who was responsible for the collapse of the National Bank of Fiji, you have serious questions, Mr. Speaker. And I want the acting Prime Minister to, for once, honestly read this report. Read this report and think about the people that they are using in government now to do the work for them. There is a theory, you know, Honorable Reddy would know this. You know, it's called state capture, Mr. Speaker. When you have a group of, a cabal of sycophants, you know, who work for the government, who sit on boards, who influence government policy, who sit on boards, who influence government policy for their own interest, then you know, Mr. Speaker, that the nation is heading towards a collapse of its governance system. And I think that is what we are heading towards, because we are not respecting the independent institutions. And those independent institutions whose heads are saying all the nice things, good things about them, they are fine. But the moment they say something which is unpalatable, which is not good, which doesn't look good for the government, they go for them. I would urge the government to stop being vindictive, because their time is over. Soon they'll be out of government. They should leave a legacy. They should try and leave a legacy of good governance and a good practice, because we are all here temporarily, Mr. Speaker, in these positions in power. And what we must do is leave some kind of legacy. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.